Welcome to this evening's event with the curators of the Everywhere Life in a Littered World exhibition here at the Arts Institute. Just for the moment, we're aware that the conference Micro 2020 has started today, and the attendees from here are joining us in the next few minutes. So we're going to start slowly to give them a chance to arrive. My name's Karen Aberdeen. I'm an artist, researcher and lecturer in fine art. This is my colleague, Laura Rosser.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, I'm Laura Rosser. I'm also a fine art lecturer and researcher, and we're especially delighted to be introducing the exhibition and welcoming delegates from the Micro 2020 conference, as this ties in so very well with our interdisciplinary focus on the BA Fine Art programme at Plymouth.
On behalf of the Arts Institute, University of Plymouth, I'm delighted to welcome you to this curator's talk celebrating the opening of the online exhibition Everywhere, Life in a Littered World. I'll be shortly handing over to the exhibition curators, Joanne and Dr. Rosemary Shirley, who have collaboratively delivered a rich and thought-provoking response to the Arts Institute's call out for a curated digital exhibition on the subject of litter. The Arts Institute commissioned the exhibition to coincide with the international conference Micro 2020, which explores the fate and impacts of microplastics in the environment. Everywhere, Life in a Littered World explores themes of scale and entanglement and shows how artists reveal, rethink, and reimagine our relationships with discarded material. The exhibition reveals the networks through which waste is produced and the global extent of its distribution. Over to Laura.
Thank you, Karen. So Micro 2020 is an international conference on the fate and impact of microplastics on the environment. This year, the conference is addressing the micro to nano, which reflects the approaches taken in investigating littering from different scales, from the daily act of casual littering to the scale of waste produced and discarded by global capitalism and the duration and dispersion of discarded matter in the environment. Micro 2020 features researchers from University of Plymouth's International Marine Litter Research Unit. And this evening, I'm delighted to introduce the curators, Dr. Rosemary Shirley and Joanne, who will talk for about half an hour each, after which there'll be about 15 minutes for questions. Also at the bottom of the screen, there's a Q&A button. So if you could please add your questions into there, and you can do this at any time during the presentation. So Joanne is an artist, writer and publisher, and is currently course leader for graphic design at Sheffield Hallam University. And Dr. Rosemary Shirley is Associate Professor of Museum Studies at the University of Leicester. Her recent work as a curator includes a major exhibition, Creating the Countryside at Compton Verney. Their research is often concerned with everyday life, and the topic of litter has often featured in their publications and creative practice. More recently, they've collaborated to explore littered urban and rural landscape in a walker's guide to littered landscapes, an exploration of interdisciplinary, imaginative and collaborative modes of attention, which functions as a field guide to the potential of interdisciplinary, imaginative, collaborative methodologies for revealing new ways of thinking about relationships to place, people and materiality, an approach they take up in this exhibition. Jo and Rosie, thank you for being with us this evening, and we're very much looking forward to hearing you discuss the ways in which contemporary artists have responded to the practices and effects of littering as revealed in the exhibition. So I'd now like to invite Rosie and Jo to talk to us about the show.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I'm just going to start off by saying a few thank yous, actually. We wanted to thank the Arts Institute for commissioning us to make this exhibition, and in particular Sarah Chapman and Mary Costello for their support in this project. We also want to thank Max Lloyd, who has put the website together and very patiently attended to our endless requests and questions. So thank you so much for that. We also wanted to thank particularly the organisers of Micro 2020, and especially the scientists who have contributed resources to the talking about litter section of this exhibition, which kind of really enrich the exhibition with that kind of scientific perspective as well. And of course, we'd like to thank all the artists who are involved in the show. So as Laura said, we're going to talk a little bit about thinking around this exhibition. Then we'll open up the website and we will share our screen and sort of talk about, give you a little virtual tour of the exhibition. We are aiming to talk in total for about 30 minutes, and then that should leave us about 15 minutes for questions. So as Laura said, if you do have a question, if something occurs to you while we're speaking, then please do put it in the Q&A box, and we'll get to those at the end. Okay.
Okay, so I thought it might be helpful if we explain just very briefly why we're interested in getting involved in this exhibition. So we both have a kind of long-standing interest in the subject of litter. I've been investigating particularly plastic bags, the humble plastic bag, which I've had a fascination with for quite a long time, and I've been kind of writing and photographing around a project that I call Witches' Knickers, which is the name for plastic bags caught on hedges, and I've kind of been writing about that for a publication on provocative plastics, which I'm going to do a shameless plug for, which the Arts Institute at Bournemouth have been putting together. So that'll be out imminently. So yeah, long-standing interest in discarded materials and discarded ordinary things.
And I guess for me, my research looks primarily at rural places and the sort of cultural representations of rural places. And I first wrote about litter in my, another plug here, in my book, Rural Modernity, Everyday Life and Visual Culture, in relation to the sort of differences between how litter is perceived and what it means in urban places as opposed to rural places, and how it can signal the idea of things or indeed people being out of place. Yeah.
So we've been kind of developing a bit of an ongoing dialogue. We've been walking together, we've been kind of making creative and critical projects together, and this exhibition's been a really interesting opportunity to kind of think through the sort of the everydayness of litter, but also to kind of look at that at scale across kind of global context. And I suppose to value the idea that artists and kind of creative practice might investigate this possibly in different ways than some of the scientists or humanities researchers might do in other contexts. So we feel there's something really valuable about the way that art can engage and kind of maybe draw people in to think about things sometimes that they wouldn't necessarily want to, but can do so in such a way that, you know, people end up somewhere different maybe as a result of the things that they encounter. So that's our hope really for the exhibition.
Yeah, and we've really pursued that approach when we've been curating the exhibition. So we've been sort of considering that artists' work enable different ways of viewing and thinking through what often feels like a huge or intractable issue. And our project recognises that while of course there's significant problems to be addressed with regard to reducing or eradicating litter, that the complex intersectionality of issues through which waste is caused and distributed demand kind of creative and critical responses that engage audiences imaginatively. So what we've done really when we're thinking about our curatorial approach to this exhibition is to almost adopt two lenses through which to think about these issues. The first one is scale, and we've already heard that the micro conference is kind of focusing this year on the micro to the macro to the nano, and so we thought scale would be a useful lens with which to think about litter. And the other lens is what we're calling entanglement, which I'll talk about in a moment. So in terms of the first lens, scale, this we're kind of taking to think about scale in terms of space or size. So between the micro and the macro, the local and the global, but also in terms of duration, timescales, between that kind of throwaway moment of throwing away like a single-use plastic bottle, and then the almost unimaginable duration of that breaking down or degrading, the life of that thing. So we're really thinking about those two ideas, scale in terms of space, but also time and duration. The second lens around entanglement is kind of looking at those ways in which the human and the non-human are intertwined. And the non-human might mean animals, or it might mean materials and objects. And also plants, obviously, and bacteria is this whole kind of non-human world, and kind of recognizing our entanglement within that world and how our actions are changing and influencing the non-human world. We wanted to kind of borrow Donna Haraway's term of staying with the trouble, which we feel acknowledges that even if solutions are kind of found and implemented, certain forms of damage are irreversible. And we're kind of interested in those sort of imaginative responses to kind of help us see what staying with the trouble, staying with the pollution, the litter in the long term might actually look like.
We've also, I suppose we've called the exhibition Everywhere because it seems that litter literally is everywhere. It's in our major cities, it's in our remote polar regions, it's at scale like the epic landfills, but it's also those kind of minute particles that might fall in plastic rain. It's the sort of waste that we think we've got rid of, but is being offshored to other cultures. So it's kind of in every aspect of daily life for so many people of the world. And I suppose whilst that's an incredibly depressing sort of thought in many ways, we also wanted to kind of try to be engaging about that and try to think, how do we live with this stuff when it is so much around us? How can we live? How can we encounter it in different ways? And how can we potentially learn to live alongside it and find ways to kind of recuperate it and kind of work out a way that we might exist imaginatively, maybe repurposing it in particular ways. So we want to think about different scales, materializations and meanings, and trying to think how we can live with what humankind has actually produced. So naturally, a lot of the work in this show is full of plastic, and in tandem with the conference, I think all the artists that we're showing work from, there is some aspect of plastic waste in each of their works. So I'm going to start sharing the screen now, and we're going to sort of talk a little bit about the exhibition, but also just want to kind of share with you the fact that on the exhibition website, which should hopefully be coming up. Is that showing, Rosie?
Yes, it is.
Hooray, that's a good thing. So just to point out that actually on the exhibition website, the section of talking about litter, which we'll come back to at the very end of our talk, is full of short talks recorded by members of the scientific community who've been participating at Micro 2020. So we'd really encourage you to kind of maybe follow up some of these ideas kind of in other spaces, and engage with what the scientists who are working at Plymouth and elsewhere are saying. So lots of work about plastic going on. So we're going to talk a little bit about scale first, as Rosie identified in the introduction. And I guess we're going to try and think a little bit about the scale of small everyday gestures and bigger kind of capitalist sort of systems. So I'm going to scroll down the screen. It's quite strange doing, we wanted to acknowledge the fact that like we've not done an online exhibition before. We're not quite sure what an online exhibition really looks like or how a curator's talk really functions in relation to that, though we've sort of looked at a lot of what other people have done. So we're kind of making our best stab at what we think might be an interesting way of putting works together in this context. So we hope you'll find that interesting. So we're going to zoom in first to the artist John Darwell, and hopefully Yes. So I'm going to scroll up and try to fill the screen. I'm doing that thing of trying to talk and scroll at the same time, which is always difficult. So John Darwell has been photographing, as you can see, what he calls DDSBs, discarded dog shit bags. So they're the poo bags that people have tried to do a good thing with, tried to pick up their dog's poo, and then actually just decided they couldn't really be bothered to carry it through to the bin or to other sort of proper places. And I suppose we were interested in the fact that an online exhibition of this kind of work allows us to show something of a sort of typology, a fact that these things, they sort of look the same, but are in subtly different ways. So the yellow bags are actually from Western Australia, and they kind of demonstrate a propensity of people on the beaches there and elsewhere to be using that to collect their dog's waste. We've also got the sort of the bags, I think, are the red bags, are from Germany. German dog owners seem to prefer those. So we were interested in these incredibly familiar things, which seem they're known in almost every sort of country. They're known internationally. They're kind of the sort of thing we don't really normally want to look at, and yet they're kind of the way that John photographs them. They're quite sort of jaunty, even though they're quite abstract at the same time. And maybe there's something kind of slightly fun about seeing them that allows us to look at them in this way, to understand both the kind of ridiculousness of this phenomena, like it's quite funny, but also the scale of it, the fact that this is happening across the world, and that we're all sort of doing it, but in our own slightly different ways, with our slightly different choice of dog bag. So that's John Darwell's work. So I've saved it's that one at the bottom that I can't actually look at. That black one is too horrific. We're scrolling past because it's too much. So we're going to zoom in a little bit now to Kai Löffelbein, who is a German photographer. And he's made this project called Control X. And Control X is that keyboard shortcut that you might be familiar with, where if you do Control X, you delete something very, very quickly, and it's kind of like it's gone in a moment. And I suppose what Löffelbein is showing is that the waste that we get rid of, especially given the fact that computers and mobile phones now have such short lives. I think the average life of a mobile phone is about 18 months, and then people are moving it on. But where does this stuff go? Löffelbein is kind of showing these journeys, this global scale of those choices that we make as consumers to buy something, then to trade it up to the next model. You know, that stuff has to go somewhere, and that waste is reprocessed. So in this series, he's explored a number of different international contexts, but the series that we've selected is focusing on the Chinese city of Guayu, which is a central place for processing of waste. And we're interested in the way it reveals the journey that waste makes, and the way that waste touches so many lives once those devices have left our hands and gone elsewhere. We should say, of course, we're scrolling through all of these things really quickly. We'd encourage you to come back and look at the exhibition and take a little bit of time, obviously after the talk. So those are Kai's works. We're going to go to Peter Nencini now, I think, Rosie. I'm going to open that.
Yeah, so Peter Nencini's piece is called Feed in Haste, but Digest at Leisure. And it's a very short sequence of images that start with this, very familiar to me, at least, as someone whose local supermarket is Morrison's, this Morrison's bag for life. And what I'm going to do actually is just let this play. It's only 45 seconds long. Yeah, so I think we're going to play that again while I talk a little bit. But basically, this is like a sequence of images which kind of move, which is kind of about consumerism and capitalism and that entanglement. I think what I really like about this work is that this sequence of images kind of acts as a constellation of ideas which move from the micro to the macro and look at that intertwining of the human and the non-human. So it moves from this everyday encounter with a discarded plastic bag to then kind of sort of obliquely referencing the sort of big business and consumption. I think there are lots of different ways to read this work, as you know, interpreting any constellation leads to different sets of ideas. But for me, the snail shell spiral kind of mirrors this sausage roll that was once produced by Guy, the Morrison's baker, whose name badge and kind of dismembered image forms part of the bag's design. And then when you look more closely at this design, the Morrison's logo, you can see that it's actually a sort of deconstructed dandelion and a wholesome sort of countrified gingham. And that, again, especially the dandelion, sort of brings us back to the hedgerow or the grass verge, where we often encounter such items. So it's really this kind of like journey, I suppose, of from the very kind of prosaic into the kind of wider machinations of consumerism and branding and by association capitalism. And yeah, I think we're going to move on to Mandy Barker next. Again, I apologise for doing this at such speed, but we would really encourage you to explore the website in your own time. So Mandy Barker is a photographer, and we're showing selections from 2 of her series of images. The first series is called Indefinite, and it's when you look at these images, they kind of look like sort of sea creatures or sort of coral reefs or kind of crustaceans of some sort, but they are actually made from debris that the artist has kind of sourced from the shoreline. And each of the images is paired with a piece of text, which kind of tells you about what this almost kind of mystery object actually is. But kind of most alarmingly really about this work is that it also tells you how long these items might take to degrade or break down. And that goes from somewhere in the 5 to 10 year region right down to this piece, which is a piece of polystyrene, which is indefinite. It doesn't break down, and this kind of chilling final sentence is, there is no away. So even though it has been thrown away, it doesn't go away, it just goes to somewhere different. The other series of work that we've included by Mandy Barker is her series Shelf Life, and we've got three images from this. Here you can see that again, we've got plastic debris, which is sort of floating in this dark space, which might be read as underwater. It also has that feeling of kind of outer space in a way as well. But again, this is to do with ocean currents, and these artworks are made with plastic that was recovered when the artist went on an expedition to the uninhabited island of Henderson Island, which is in the South Pacific. And even though nobody lives there, they recovered 6 tons of plastic from the beaches and the surrounding waters of that island. And these artworks are made with some of those items that they recovered. And you can see that in this image in particular, especially if you look at the green bottle in the middle, you can see that it's become kind of ragged. And that is because sea turtles have been kind of taking bites out of it. Which is obviously a very dangerous situation for those animals. As well as this kind of description of what the items are, she also titles them using a barcode. And the barcode kind of gives an indication of the kind of country of origin of these pieces of plastic. So we have Malaysia and Thailand and China, and it kind of gives this, it speaks of the kind of geographical reach of these items, which are transported by ocean currents very much around the world, and litter becomes this very kind of international problem. And again, in the Talking About Litter page, you can see Dr. Eric van Siebel talk about how ocean currents are instrumental in transporting this kind of plastic debris around the world.
Okay, I'm going to go to Diana. So Diana is a Polish artist, and she's been exploring areas of Poland that have had illegal dumping, all sorts of different contexts. And we're interested particularly in her work because of that kind of idea of entanglement, the idea that these sort of natural and cultural forms are coming together. So this shoe is providing a kind of an anchor for this plant to grow. And we're kind of interested in the fact that the waste that we produce, it's already being colonized by plants and animals and creating microhabitats, and will presumably continue to do so for some considerable period of time. So this has happened quite quickly. These are relatively recent dump sites, but we're kind of interested in the way that these things are going to likely endure for quite some time, but maybe they provide a sort of slight counterpoint to the kind of plastic nibbled by turtles that Rosie was just talking about, because in a way these kind of items are providing a home now for creatures. They're providing refuge. I remember some years ago talking to a biologist who was saying that when people pull shopping trolleys out of canals, it's always not always a good thing, because sometimes they actually provide nurseries for young fish so they don't get eaten by enormous carp. So there's like a kind of weird counter indicators, and I think that idea that yes, of course, the bottles that Mandy was showing are pretty horrific in the sea. They're perhaps not incredibly beautiful on land, but here they're providing a sort of substrate for plants to kind of get a foothold on and begin to grow. So she's a kind of Diana Lelanek is a kind of botanist, I guess, that's kind of really exploring the kind of possibilities of what this material might be. It's abject, it's broken, but also it's kind of being positive for these species that are finding a home upon it. You can also, on the website, there's also a sort of video tour at the bottom, which you can click through and you can explore for yourself. There's a set of tours of illegal dump sites in Poland, so you can put some of these places in context and understand where these plants and animals are actually kind of finding a home. We're going to Pinar now, is that right, Rosie?
That's right, yes. Okay, so we're showing a selection of work from Pinar Yoldas's series called The Ecosystem of Excess. And here she, it's both about scale in terms of time scale and duration, because she imagines this future in which the oceans have become so polluted that it's caused different kind of evolutionary pathways to open up. And we can see the birds and sea creatures sort of having to adapt to and become more successful if they do adapt to being able to eat plastic effectively. So we've got both scale in terms of this long duration, and we've also got entanglement in terms of plastic and animals and the environment. So you can see here this image of the Pantone birds that she's imagined, this idea that through the constant digestion of bottle tops, which she's kind of coded in these different Pantone colours, this has kind of influenced the plumage of certain birds. And if you can scroll down a bit, Jo, that would be great, thanks. And then there's this turtle, the plastic balloon turtle, that through eons of consuming plastic bags, no, not plastic bags, balloons, the turtle has actually kind of evolved to use this to its own advantage and to kind of inflate and deflate as necessary, to help it on its journeys around the ocean in various different tides. And then these very striking images are Pinar Yoldas's imaginings of potentially these newly evolved organs that creatures might develop to enable them to navigate these polluted seas more effectively. So we've got an organ that's for sensing plastics. We've got one that's for digesting plastics. And in themselves, they almost look like kind of sea creatures in some way themselves.
Okay, so we're moving on to Tejal Shah. And Tejal Shah is an artist based in India, and this project Landfill Dance is a sequence from a much larger sort of installation, but this was a sort of standalone piece of her installation, and we've selected this piece for the show. I'm just going to make that grow. It has got a bit of sound, but it's incredibly quiet, so I am just going to sort of talk, and if some weird noises happen, it's not, I'm not haunted, it's kind of happening on the video. So we were interested in Tejal's work because it seems to kind of almost follow on some of the ideas that Pinar was talking about in terms of the kind of duration of litter. So that idea that, you know, the animals she's speculating might have evolved into these weird new forms. I guess Shah is thinking a little bit about what does it mean to be a human alive amongst all of this vast amount of waste, that, you know, maybe we need to have new myths or new ways of kind of dealing with creating an imaginative universe or a kind of new set of rituals to deal with what these spaces might be. I like to imagine, you know, archaeologists discovering, sort of going through waste tips in many years time and finding strange objects and beginning to wonder, you know, what symbolism they had or what they might mean. Her landfill dance, which involves these costumed dancers, and the costumes are all made from materials that were found. They're all repurposed, and they're all quite sort of, when you see them closer up, they have like horns and they have headgear, and there's something kind of really beautifully fantastic about them. They have little cockroaches that are printed onto their plastic dresses as well. And maybe, oh, that was really weird, I don't know what happened. And I think this is the buffering of being on the internet and trying to play things on the internet at the same time. So you can see the scale of the waste amongst which the dancers are performing. And it's a kind of almost sort of cosmological fable, I guess, about living in the future with this vast volume of waste, and how we might begin as humans to start making sense of it in our myths and our ways of believing. It's about a 5-minute long piece, so again, really encourage you to come back and explore the kind of beautiful and horrific experience of seeing the dancers in the landfill dance. Now we're going to go to Detailer.
Yes. And kind of linking on from Tejal Shah's piece, this idea of needing to find new ways of understanding what these items are, what this litter is. We're very pleased to be able to include Dee Taylor's work, which again takes us back to the streets in a way that, you know, we started with John Darwell. But this is like a really fascinating way of looking at litter. His work, or their work, kind of invests litter with the sort of power to communicate sort of hidden messages to us that need to be teased out, and they have really sort of changed the way that I personally look at litter. So this piece is called Different Ways of Saying the Same Thing, and you know, you can see that it really kind of makes you look at this discarded material, really sort of see it and kind of notice those formal similarities, and then suddenly think, is there a pattern here? What is it that I'm missing? So, you know, you've kind of got this white string on the left, which is in a sort of the same shape as this, whatever this blue thing is. Again, also, you just don't know what these things are. They've kind of degraded to a point where you're just not really sure. Do you want to move on to the next one, Do? Or the doors to the underworld? I've picked out this one to talk a little bit about as well. The door to the underworld is open. And I think that this appeals to me so much because when we come upon unexpected litter, like fly tipping in a wood, or like this weird discarded shoe, and we just don't know what's happened or where this has come from, it kind of makes us feel as if there's this parallel world of activities that are happening by other people, maybe kind of like after dark or sort of just out of reach. And here, that other world, that parallel world, is signalled by the presence of litter, but in a more kind of occult way, as if these two pieces of wire are not pieces of wire, but indeed they are signals for those who know how to read them, telling us of the presence of this other world that's ready to receive us. And this piece as well, the unpronounceable names of gutter demons. Again, it's kind of got that occult feeling to it. But I like the idea that litter could be read like graphically, like as if its form really could be letters from an unpronounceable language, something that I'm just not familiar with. And again, that's really sort of made me think differently about the sort of formal properties of litter. Like, yeah, could we make a new vocabulary? Could we make a new typeface with this, with these found kind of pieces of weirdness that we just otherwise ignore?
So I think we've taken you through a very whistle-stop tour of the exhibition, and we'd encourage you certainly to kind of go back and have a little bit of a browse and a kind of look and think about the conversations about scale, about entanglement, and maybe other things that you're beginning to notice yourselves. We'd also just like to really point out that as well as the artworks that are there, we just wanted to share with you the fact that we've got a page called Talking About Litter, which has a series of the scientists who are involved in Micro 2020, some of whom are from here in the University of Plymouth, and you know, it'd be really great for you to explore some of the their perspectives about what's kind of going on in the world of research to try to tackle some of the things that we're kind of noticing have come through the world. So certainly have a look at the scientists' talks. And actually, sorry, I meant to scroll down, sorry to make you dizzy. And the other page really, just to point out that there are loads of other resources that if you're kind of interested in litter as a topic, if we've whetted your appetite, there are many kind of interesting publications and different things that are there that you might want to explore, as well as some of the work of the marine litter researchers here at University of Plymouth. So again, just kind of pointing you in that direction. So we hope that's been interesting, not too long, not too quick, and we'd really love to sort of take some questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I think Rosie and I will appear again slightly larger. we were before. And I think we've got some questions that might be coming through.
Yeah, the first question is, did the artists involved in this exhibition have to think carefully about their own materials / contribution to litter? That's really interesting, isn't it? Kind of like, are you inadvertently creating new objects or using environmentally unsound materials in the making of artworks? And something I think artists are certainly taking more seriously now.
We had quite a lot of conversations when we were first starting to curate things. Like, we found some really interesting artists and some really interesting works, as well as the people that we've eventually sort of decided to work with. And we had some conversations over like whether there were things that seemed to be pointing out really interesting responses to the problem, but we had sort of questions over whether the materials that they were using were as repurposed as they said, or whether they were kind of new. And we felt sort of ethically that was quite like an important issue, really, that things had to be found, or they had to be as they were in the world. We didn't want to create more problems.
Yeah. What else do we have? We have some nice comments from people. Anthony Carr says, in your research, have you noticed a different approach to litter in reference to the geographic location of an artist?
I mean, I suppose it's interesting about, like, some people have chosen very much to work close to home, and it's like it isn't, or literally in the places that they just happen to be. And so I suspect that detailers work, like, I guess we would probably find a lot of those similar sorts of things in many places, particularly maybe urban places, because I guess they're all photographed against sort of pavements, and they feel like the sort of dropped material. And I guess the same with sort of John Darwell's work, that stuff is international. But I think it's interesting, you know, you do, even here I mean, I'm based in the UK, I go out walking around my neighbourhood quite a lot, and it's really interesting about which areas are littered and which are not. And sometimes that's to do with, you know, I'm really aware it's often to do with areas of deprivation, you know, that litter doesn't just sort of, like, I guess sometimes it's about the fact that the council are more likely to come around and clear certain areas than other areas. And I've heard that said here in Sheffield, that there are people who will nag the council to make sure that the litter is cleaned up more in some areas than others. So I think there's sometimes like a class issue about power. But also just like often in some of the, again here in Sheffield, some of the poorer areas, people are often living much closer together. You know, there aren't the facilities in houses of multiple occupation or in multi-generational families. A lot of the system isn't set up to kind of support people. So you tend to get more litter in some of those areas for those kind of reasons to do with social factors. So that's not really dealing with geographical specifically, that's like a micro geographical of a sort of experience in Sheffield maybe. I don't know, Rosie, if you've got a different response.
Oh, I've been trying to think about that, and there's sort of, and whether there's different perspectives from artists who are based in different areas. I mean, Tejal Shah's work is perhaps an obvious one to think about in terms of the ways in which different waste becomes visible in different countries, and how it's kind of dealt with, and, you know, sort of whether it becomes something that is you know, in the UK, in the West, as Kai Loffenbeim's work kind of shows, our waste becomes invisible in that it is shipped elsewhere, whereas Tejal Shah's work shows the kind of proximity of those very large landfills to a large city, and so maybe that kind of can create a different sort of sensibility for how an artist might think about what's important and how to represent it. Do we have time for one more question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm slightly going to make sure that we kind of do answer the question. I'm going to run a couple of things together, because I think there's one question about the idea of these things being beautiful and yet horrendous at the same time, which also seems to relate a little bit to the kind of comment about whether we're being sort of distanced from some of those things by, I guess, the way they're presented online, and they're kind of intimate in our homes, because we're looking at them like, I'm sure you probably didn't think you were going to look at pictures of dog poo in bags whilst you just had your tea, but there's a kind of, at the same time, they are distanced because they're photographed and then they're selected on the website and they're put in a grid, which immediately kind of gives them a cooler sort of effect, I guess, than if you were encountering that material sort of in the wild, so to speak. So I think that there is something, we had quite a lot of conversations around, I mean, we've ended up with quite a lot of works that are photographic or are sort of video, and maybe that might be different if this was like an in real life exhibition. We were certainly thinking what would work on a screen. And you gain certain things there where maybe people are willing to look at certain things in a particular way on the screen because there's a sort of safety of the screen. But at the same time, maybe we also lose something of that, like the horror of some of those things, where it is really kind of abject and really grim.
I agree. I think you said that very well, Jo. Okay, well, we've run 4 minutes over. There are quite a lot of other questions, though. It's quite difficult to read them and think about timekeeping and as well. Do you think perhaps we should leave it there?
I think we probably, we started slightly late and we've now just finished slightly late, and that's probably the time that people had signed up for. I mean, I suspect, maybe what we'd say anyway is like our contact details are on the website. We're really up for having conversations about these things, and if you want to carry on the conversation, please do. I think we're both up for that kind of continuing dialogue and debate. So we'd just like to thank you very much for coming this evening. Hope it's been interesting. Hope you'll go and explore the exhibition, and we'll look forward to hopefully having further conversations about litter very, very soon.